When I arrived at IIASA, the first thing I remember, climbing the tree out here. That was a tree that was used frequently by our research group, which had been here earlier, as a place to drink beer. So that's my memory of arriving as director. 2 months later, the U.S. withdrew from IIASA. That is the U.S. National Academy of Sciences. Reagan had come into office, and the Reagan administration was very hostile to multilateral agreements that involved the U.S. So they pulled out the money that was going to the National Academy. The National Academy, not having money, had to withdraw. 2 months after I was here. The Russians began thinking about withdrawing because the only reason they were there was as a counterweight to the United States. So here I was. One of the main forces behind the Institute had withdrawn. The Russians still didn't know how to deal with that. So I went and got a deputy director from the U.S. who had some notable history, oddly, as an analyst with the CIA, Chester Cooper. Wonderful man. But I got him in part because the Russians knew, for a while anyway, they shouldn't mess with him. And so the next 3-4 years was a difficult, tumultuous time in which, in my memory, singular people emerged, singular projects got formed. I had enormous difficulty getting rid of the lousy ones, and every institute has bad programs. There had developed an embedded role for the council, largely in trying to get their scientists in their particular country deeply engaged in the IIASA work. And some of them weren't good enough, frankly. So the question was, how can we reduce those people who aren't contributing, get the other ones who were extremely good and deeply engaged, and we got a few, which was great. There were the launching, or essentially the launching of the further energizing, rather, of the climate change activity, which was excellent. A deepening and strengthening of what was then called methodology, which to me meant studying complex dynamic systems that flip every once in a while. Like our global system is now flipping since 2008. So it was a turbulent time, which is great, and an exciting time. And I was glad to be there to help. I had no sense of where IIASA might continue. Eventually the Americans came back in, which was excellent. The Soviet Union broke up, another big crisis for IIASA. There was a wonderful extension towards the south, other nations, to produce what is really a much more, I would say, balanced institute, but one that is not so politically sort of focused. You know, the origin was to recognize the division east and west, to bring together scientists from both sides and talk science, not talk politics, which worked partly. It was nice to see today Gaviciani, the first council member, council head, yeah, his son. Lovely to see his son, who also commented on that turbulent time. So it has been It's been a profoundly important institute, it seems to me, because it has taken systems analysis, which is a lousy name, by the way. I'll tell you why the name. And turned it into something that was emphasized integrative across disciplines, integrative between science and policy. And that's what was needed then and continues to be needed. But it is deeper and more extensive, that integration, than it ever used to be. And IIASA, I think, and Howard Rafa particularly, who was the first director, can particularly take credit for making that synthesis happen. Systems analysis was chosen as a name in a committee. The Russians wanted the name the Institute of Cybernetics, because that word, cybernetics, to them captured this property of integrating across different disciplines using mathematical approaches. The Western people were more comfortable with the two words, systems analysis. I think both words were fine at the time, but it basically means integrative understanding of complex systems, integrating across disciplines, integrating between science and policy. My own personal work has focused on what's known as adaptive approaches to resource and environmental systems. And that whole field, while it started outside IIASA, came into IIASA in the first year the doors opened. I was director of the ecology group. And at that time, we didn't know whether we were going to be working in a hotel somewhere or in the castle. We ended up in a temporary building just off here. And because there were people, Howard had brought together just outstanding people, like George Danzig, for example, so well known in operations research, and Holling an outstanding economist of extraordinary breadth and vision. He'd brought together and Howard himself with his decision theory. And we sucked them into being interested in our problems. And on that basis, enormously expanded the testing of methods and seeing what worked, what didn't work. And out of it grew this great emphasis on adaptive management, on the particular theory called resilience. And I think IIASA had a really important role in triggering a major advance in that particular field. I think energy too. At the beginning, Wolf Hefele from Germany was the first head of a research project. It was the energy project. And Wolf and I became great friends, but great disagreements between us, or not disagree, great arguments, constructive arguments. And Wolf ran his project in the way you might expect a well-organized German would, top-down and so forth. I ran my project in the way a well-disorganized Canadian might, which was very flat and lots of interaction, workshops around the world and so on. So our style was radically different, but our interest in stability and instability in complex systems was the center of where our conversations intersected. He had a thesis, his PhD thesis, involved, as I remember, turbulence. And so we became rather closely engaged, and he was a wonderful, 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 wonderful man. We got, at that time, it was extremely difficult to get a computer. Amazing. And I'm being a little bit extreme in what I'm saying, I guess. But at that time, the thought was the American Academy of Sciences, National Academy of Sciences, could recommend the best kind of computer that a new institute should have. Well, from my perspective, coming from a small institute in Canada, where the big computers were utterly ancient, or not ancient, they were extremely difficult to use in an interactive environment. We knew what the small computer should be, and so I asked Howard, or I said to Howard, here's what you should have. Would you like us to invite the guy who set it up? Howard said, yes, please do. Yeah, bring him here. So they brought him here and then replicated that computer. There was a lot of that sort of thing happening. People with particular strengths in particular nations, combining those strengths in a way to forward IIASA's goals and objectives. It was a wonderful time. I think now is the time for experiments, that is, novel new ways to examine the world about us, novel ways to combine it with policy, knowing that because they're experiments, some will fail, but hoping to initiate the experiments that will combine, be integrated to move into the next phase of development in the world now. Thinking now beyond East-West, thinking beyond Western Europe and North America, thinking truly of the full world. And that's where I think the heart of IIASA is and where the work will emerge.